"Take off that lipstick, it doesn't suit you," ordered the millionaire with contempt. But when another woman wore it in front of him, he completely lost control. "Tell me, where are you watching from? And if you want to discover this unexpected twist, subscribe to the channel and leave your like. This story will leave you speechless." The summer veranda was bathed in golden light filtering through centuries-old oak trees when Mr. Thaddeus Winthrop's fist crashed down on the mahogany table. The Waterford crystal glasses tinkled like fragile wind chimes, heralding a storm. A heavy silence immediately descended, enveloping the guests in a suffocating atmosphere. "Remove that lipstick, immediately. It doesn't suit you at all." Thaddeus's voice cut through the air like a sharpened blade. Phoebe felt the blood rush to her cheeks as all the guests' eyes turned toward her, some filled with pity, others with unwholesome curiosity. At 28, hired just 2 weeks ago to manage the estate of one of the wealthiest men in Massachusetts, she found herself humiliated over a simple crimson lipstick, purchased that very morning at a boutique in Boston. Her trembling fingers brushed her lips, as if to protect the small touch of color that had given her, for the first time in months, the feeling of existing again. The burning gazes of the guests on her skin reminded her why she had sworn never again to let herself be dominated by anyone. "They never really remove our chains," she thought as she slowly rose. "We simply choose to wear prettier ones." The wisteria estate stretched across several acres, surrounded by rolling lawns and gardens that swayed under the caresses of the wind. The main house, a New England manor with stones weathered by centuries of sun and snow, appeared majestic and welcoming from the outside. Yet Phoebe discovered daily that its thick walls concealed more secrets than warmth. 3 weeks after the lipstick incident, she was busy in her office, checking the estate's accounts. The previous manager had left precipitously without explanation, leaving behind administrative chaos that perfectly served Phoebe's interests. The more indispensable she became, the more her position would be secured, despite the humiliations. "Miss Lockhart, could you come to my office?" Thaddeus's voice resonated through the intercom fixed to the wall. Phoebe closed her eyes for a moment, gathering her courage. With each summons, she felt her stomach knot like a clenched fist. Crossing the main hallway, she slowed imperceptibly before an oil portrait. A woman with sad eyes, dressed in a midnight blue gown, seemed to follow her with her gaze. Sylvia Winthrop, Thaddeus's wife, a woman no one ever spoke of, but whose ghostly presence permeated every corner of the estate. "You wanted to see me, sir?" Thaddeus Winthrop, 38, stood near the window, a glass of wine in hand. Tall, elegant, with perfectly coiffed dark hair and brown eyes that never seemed to blink, he embodied a natural authority, reinforced by his considerable fortune. "The Harvest Festival approaches, Miss Lockhart. I'd like you to personally oversee the recruitment of seasonal staff." "Of course, but I thought Mr. Lawrence usually handled that." "Mr. Lawrence no longer works at the estate." The tone left no room for questions. Another unexplained departure, the third since her arrival. "I expect excellence and discretion," he continued, approaching her, his sandalwood cologne invading the space between them. "Two rare qualities, but ones I believe I've identified in you. Don't disappoint me." She nodded, aware of the double edge of this sudden promotion. Increased trust meant closer scrutiny. As she left the office, she noticed, sitting on a shelf, a small rosewood box. Its half-open lid revealed a tube of lipstick, crimson. "He controls even the air you breathe, my dear." Martha, the 60-year-old cook with hands covered in age spots, kneaded bread dough with surprising vigor for her age. Phoebe, sitting on a kitchen stool, watched her while sipping her coffee. These stolen moments before dawn constituted their unspoken ritual, an island of freedom before the estate awakened. "How long did you work for Mrs. Winthrop?" 6 years. "Poor little thing." Martha paused, casting a worried glance toward the door. "Walls have ears here." Phoebe understood this caution. In 2 months, she had learned the unwritten rules of the estate, the approved colors for staff clothing, the permitted fragrances, even the appropriate tone of voice for each room. The entire house constantly smelled of lavender and lemon, the only scents that Thaddeus deemed acceptable. "I have to inventory the attic today," Phoebe murmured, rising. "Is there anything I should know?" Martha's gaze darkened. "Some rooms hold more than dust, my girl. Some keep truths that others would prefer buried." The attic occupied the entire top floor of the east wing, Bathed in light filtering through the shutters, the space was filled with antiques, trunks, and paintings covered with white sheets. The scent of dried jasmine mingled with that of old wood. Phoebe proceeded methodically, noting each item in her inventory. In a corner behind a massive armoire, a narrow door caught her attention. It was locked, but the door frame seemed slightly warped, as if someone had recently forced it. Her curiosity overcame her caution. Using a hairpin, she manipulated the lock until she heard a satisfying click. The revealed room was tiny, barely larger than a closet. On the walls, dozens of pinned photographs. On a small mahogany table, a cedar box. Her heart skipped a beat when she recognized the face in the photographs. Sylvia Winthrop, but not as portrayed in the official portrait. Here she was laughing, hair blowing on a beach, dancing in a red dress, painting in a sun-flooded studio. And in each image she wore the same shade of crimson lipstick that Phoebe had been forced to remove. With trembling hands, she opened the cedar box. Inside, dozens of unsent letters, all in the same elegant handwriting. He chose my clothes first, then my friends, and finally my dreams. I wonder if he realizes that in seeking to perfectly possess someone, one ends up possessing nothing at all. Phoebe startled at the sound of footsteps on the stairs. Quickly, she put everything back in place, locked the door, and repositioned herself near the trunks she had been initially inventorying. Thaddeus appeared at the top of the stairs, his scrutinizing gaze sweeping the space. Making progress. Yes, sir. There are many more items than anticipated. Don't explore too much, Miss Lockhart. Some things belong to the past and should remain there. As he descended, Phoebe felt a shiver run down her spine. Had he guessed? Or was it simply a habitual warning, one of those ambiguous phrases he specialized in? That night she slept poorly, haunted by Sylvia's smiling face and a nagging question. What had become of this woman who had dared to wear crimson? The wrought iron gate of the estate always emitted a characteristic creak when it opened. This particular sound Phoebe had integrated as a warning signal, alerting her to a visitor's arrival even before they appeared in the cypress-lined driveway. This August morning, the creaking sounded when no one was expected. From her window, she glimpsed a female figure crossing the entrance on foot, declining the security guard's offer to drive her to the main house in a golf cart. The woman advanced with a confident step, dressed in a navy blue dress that rippled around her like a nocturnal wave. Her chestnut hair, cut in a bob, framed a face with fine features. But what struck Phoebe were her lips, painted with a crimson red, exactly identical to the one that had sparked the scandal 3 months earlier. A presentiment prompted her to quickly descend, just in time to see the visitor being greeted by Thaddeus in the entrance hall. Her employer, usually so composed, seemed destabilized, his hands nervously gripping his jacket lapels. Audrey, what a surprise. Hello, Thaddeus. 8 years without news is a long time, isn't it? The tension between them was almost palpable, charged with an untold history that Phoebe sensed was painful. She was about to discreetly withdraw when Thaddeus spotted her. Miss Lockhart, please prepare tea in the small parlor. The small parlor, rarely used, was the most isolated room in the house, perfect for a conversation one wished to keep confidential. While preparing the tea service, Phoebe observed the scene through the half-open door. The woman, Audrey, was examining the room as if searching for something. Or someone. Where is she, Thaddeus? The question cracked like a whip. I don't know who you're talking about. Don't take me for a fool. Sylvia, my sister, where is she? Phoebe nearly dropped the tray. Sylvia's sister. Here, after 8 years. Sylvia chose to leave us. This subject has been closed for a long time. Nothing is closed. Audrey pulled an envelope from her bag. I received this 2 weeks ago. Official documents requiring her signature for our mother's estate. The address indicated is this one. Yet, according to you, she's been living abroad. Phoebe entered at that moment, deliberately making noise with the tray to signal her presence. The two protagonists instantly fell silent. Your tea, sir. Ma'am, would you like lemon? No, thank you. Audrey scrutinized her intently. Have you worked here long? 3 months, ma'am. And you've never met Sylvia Winthrop, the lady of the house? Thaddeus intervened sharply. That will be all, Miss Lockhart. But Audrey wasn't finished. She rose, approaching Phoebe. Up close, the resemblance to the photos discovered in the attic was striking. If you ever cross paths with my sister, tell her Audrey is looking for her, and that some things cannot remain buried forever. After her departure, the estate seemed plunged into an even heavier silence than usual. Thaddeus locked himself in his office for the rest of the day, and dinner was cancelled. That night, a storm broke over Massachusetts, intermittently illuminating Phoebe's room. Lying in her bed, she contemplated the ceiling, mulling over the day's events. Where was Sylvia? Why this concealment? And above all, what role did she, Phoebe, play in this story, of which she knew only fragments? The rain hammered against the windows like so many unanswered questions, and somewhere in the vast mansion she thought she heard a muffled sob. The cedar box weighed in Phoebe's hands, as if it contained not paper, but the full weight of a stifled life. After Audrey's visit, she had waited 3 days, observing Thaddeus sink into an even darker mood than usual, before returning to the secret room in the attic. This time she had taken the box. A theft, perhaps, but she felt it more as a rescue. These words deserved to be read, this voice to be heard. Sitting cross-legged on her bed at 2 in the morning, she began to read Sylvia's letters chronologically. The first ones overflowed with love and hope. My dear father, Thaddeus gave me a ring today, a sapphire circled by diamonds, magnificent but so heavy on my finger. Like our love, he said, indestructible and eternal. I should be fulfilled, shouldn't I? Yet I feel this slight apprehension, like a cloud passing before the sun. Your loving daughter, Sylvia. The following letters, spaced a few months apart, revealed an insidious transformation. Audrey. He suggested that I no longer see Claire and Sophie. According to him, they exert a negative influence on me. Yesterday he threw away my brushes because the smell of oil paint gave him migraines. I didn't protest. Why didn't I protest? Your sister who fades a little more each day. Sylvia. The letters from the final years, never sent like the previous ones, recounted a slow psychological descent into hell. Dear mother, gone too soon. Today I realized I couldn't remember the sound of my own laughter. Is it possible to forget that? I tried in front of my mirror, but the sound that came out seemed to belong to a stranger. He controls everything. The clothes I wear, the people I see, the air I breathe. The estate has become my prison, and the worst part is that I participated in building my own bars. But I feel something being reborn in me, Mom. A spark of who I was before. I bought a lipstick today, crimson, bold, vibrant. I hid it in the lining of my winter coat. A small act of rebellion. Ridiculous, perhaps, but it's a start. Your daughter trying to remember. Sylvia. The last letter dated from exactly 8 years ago. To myself, for it's finally the only person I must learn to know again. It's decided. Tomorrow I wear the crimson lipstick to lunch with the Millers, then let the consequences be what they may, but I cannot live like this anymore. A gilded cage remains a cage. There is a world beyond these walls, and I intend to rediscover it. I am 28 years old, and my life still awaits me. This is not an end, but a beginning. With courage, the woman I am becoming again. Phoebe set down the last letter, her heart pounding. The parallel between her own situation and Sylvia's struck her with painful clarity. Hadn't she too accepted this job out of financial necessity after her divorce and the bankruptcy of her small ceramic boutique? Wasn't she also submitting to Thaddeus's arbitrary rules, his control, to keep this salary she desperately needed? A noise in the hallway made her jump. Quickly she hid the box under her bed and turned off her lamp. Footsteps stopped outside her door, hesitated, then moved away. Lying in the darkness, a resolution formed in her mind. She needed to discover what had happened to Sylvia after that last letter, and for that she needed Audrey. I notice your attire doesn't comply with the estate's standards, Miss Lockhart. Thaddeus observed her from the threshold of the library, where Phoebe was cataloguing the impressive collection of books on American history. Her dress, a slightly more vivid blue than the pastel shades usually tolerated, constituted a minor but deliberate infraction. Please excuse me, sir. The laundry hasn't yet returned my other outfits. A lie, of course, a calculated provocation inspired by her nocturnal reading. Make sure it doesn't happen again. But instead of leaving, he lingered, examining the shelves as if seeking a specific title. You seem different these days, Miss Lockhart. Really? She strove to appear relaxed. I don't see how. More observant, as if you're searching for something. He turned to her, his penetrating gaze piercing through her. "Is there something you wish to ask me?" The invitation was tempting but dangerous. She decided to take a measured risk. "I was just wondering, where is Mrs. Winthrop?" Her sister seemed very concerned. A muscle twitched on Thaddeus's jaw. "My wife and I have been separated for 8 years. She chose to go live abroad. South America, I believe. We no longer have contact. Audrey simply refuses to accept this reality." "I understand. It's just that her portrait is still hanging in the main hall. Some appearances must be maintained, Miss Lockhart. In our social circle, a divorce is always inelegant." With these words, he left the room, leaving her alone with a growing sense of unease. His explanation seemed almost plausible, and yet, why lie to Audrey about the estate's address if Sylvia had truly left? This conversation strengthened her determination. The next day, being her day off, she went to the city, to Cambridge. In a discreet cafe near Harvard Square, she had arranged to meet Audrey, contacted through her hotel's receptionist. Sylvia's sister arrived 15 minutes early, as if she had feared Phoebe might change her mind. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," said Audrey, sitting down. "You're taking a risk." Thaddeus doesn't particularly appreciate personal initiatives from his employees. "I need to know what happened to your sister." Phoebe took the carefully copied last letter of Sylvia's from her bag. Audrey read it quickly, her eyes filling with tears. "Her handwriting," she murmured. "Where did you find this?" "In a hidden room in the attic. There are dozens more. All written by your sister, never sent. The last one dates from exactly 8 years ago." Audrey closed her eyes for a moment, as if gathering her strength. "My sister and Thaddeus met in New York, at an exhibition where she was presenting her paintings. She was talented, radiant, full of life. He seduced her, dazzled her. Their marriage was celebrated 6 months later. And then he began to change her, little by little, so subtly that even I didn't notice at first. First it was her clothes. 'This color ages you. This style doesn't suit your new status.' Then her friends. 'They don't understand our world.' Then her painting. 'All right, but not in the main house.' And finally, her very personality. 'A woman of your rank doesn't laugh like that in public.'" Phoebe recognized this process. Hadn't she experienced the same thing with her ex-husband? This slow but constant erosion of identity, to the point of no longer recognizing herself in the mirror. And then, one day, she disappeared. Thaddeus claimed she had left him, gone to remake her life abroad. But Sylvia would never have left without saying goodbye to me, without leaving a trace. And above all, she would never have abandoned her paintings. They were her soul. "You think something happened to her?" Audrey hesitated. "I don't know. I contacted the police at the time, but Thaddeus produced letters, evidence of bank transfers to accounts abroad. Everything seemed to indicate she had left voluntarily." "But you don't believe it?" "No. And this letter confirms what I always knew. Sylvia had decided to rebel, not to flee. She would have confronted Thaddeus, not disappeared without a trace." Phoebe felt a shiver run through her. "What do you intend to do?" "Continue searching, and I'd like you to help me. You have access to the estate, to documents, to places I can't reach." It was dangerous, of course, but Sylvia's face in the photographs, her elegant handwriting on the aged paper, this troubling resemblance to her own situation, Phoebe couldn't refuse. "Agreed, but we must be careful. Thaddeus is observant and potentially dangerous," Audrey added in a low voice. On the way back to the estate, Phoebe couldn't help scrutinizing the shadows of the maples lining the road, as if some hidden truth would suddenly reveal itself between their gnarled branches. For the first time since her arrival, she felt truly in danger, but also paradoxically more alive than she had been in a long time. The decision took shape in Phoebe's mind on a morning when the wind blew particularly strongly, making the shutters clatter and the centuries-old beams of the estate groan. This wind, they said in New England, drove mad those who listened to it too long. Perhaps it was true because what she was about to do bordered on a kind of madness. In the bathroom adjoining her room, she took out the tube of crimson lipstick purchased the day she arrived at the estate from its hiding place. She had never thrown it away, keeping it as a talisman, a reminder of her small aborted rebellion. With a steady hand, she applied it to her lips, observing in the mirror this subtle but significant transformation. It wasn't just makeup, but a challenge issued, a tribute to Sylvia, and above all an affirmation of her own existence. The estate was hosting an important business lunch that day. American buyers, potentially interested in exporting Winthrop wines, were to arrive at noon. Phoebe, as manager, would be present to discuss logistical and financial aspects. Dressed in a midnight blue suit, Sylvia's favorite color according to the photographs, and proudly sporting her crimson lipstick, she descended toward the terrace where lunch would be served. On her way, she passed Sylvia's portrait in the main hall. For the first time, she no longer saw sadness in those painted eyes, but a form of sisterhood, of silent encouragement. "What is this?" Thaddeus stood at the foot of the stairs, his gaze fixed on Phoebe's lips with an expression oscillating between fury and panic. "Good morning, Mr. Winthrop. Is there a problem?" Her voice was calm, almost gentle, contrasting with the tumult agitating her heart. "You know perfectly well what the problem is. This—" He waved his hand toward her face. "Remove it immediately." "I'm afraid that's impossible, sir. The guests arrive in 20 minutes and I don't have time to change, unless you prefer I cancel the presentation of the financial projections." It was a low blow, and she knew it. The projections she had prepared were crucial for this negotiation. Thaddeus stared at her, a vein visibly pulsing at his temple. "You're playing a dangerous game, Miss Lockhart." "It's just lipstick, sir. Nothing more." But they both knew it was much more than that. The lunch unfolded in a strange atmosphere. The Americans, unaware of the underlying tensions, enjoyed the wines and cuisine. Phoebe presented her figures with quiet confidence, aware of Thaddeus's gaze never leaving her, as if she might suddenly transform into someone else. Into Sylvia, perhaps. At one point, one of the Americans mentioned the portrait in the hall. "Your wife, I presume. A magnificent painting. Is she present today?" An awkward silence fell. Thaddeus cleared his throat. "My wife and I have been separated for several years. She lives abroad." "What a shame," replied the American, before quickly changing the subject, sensing the discomfort. Phoebe noticed that Thaddeus's hand trembled slightly as he set down his glass. A tiny detail, but revealing for someone usually so self-possessed. After the guest's departure, Thaddeus locked himself in his office. Phoebe, expecting immediate reprisals, was surprised when the day ended without a summons. It was only after dinner, as she crossed the garden to return to her room, that he intercepted her. Night was falling, enveloping the trees in elongated shadows. Fireflies danced among the lavender, creating an almost magical atmosphere that contrasted with the palpable tension. "You don't know what you're doing," he said in a strangely vulnerable voice. "What you're triggering? Enlighten me, then. Some resemblances aren't accidental, some gestures have echoes. Like wearing crimson lipstick? Like Sylvia did before disappearing?" He flinched as if she had slapped him. "Who told you about that?" "Walls whisper, Mr. Winthrop. Letters too, sometimes." In the half-light, she couldn't discern his expression well, but his breathing had accelerated. "You should be careful, Phoebe. Very careful." The use of her first name, a first, sounded like a barely veiled threat. "Is this the moment I'm supposed to be afraid?" she replied, with an assurance she was far from feeling. "This is the moment you should remember that curiosity is a nasty fault. Ask Audrey what happens to people who are too curious." With these enigmatic words, he turned on his heel and disappeared into the darkness of the garden, leaving her alone with even more questions than before, and the growing certainty that she was approaching a truth perhaps darker than she had imagined. The crushing September heat weighed on the estate like a lead blanket. The harvest festival was in full swing, filling the air with the sweet scent of ripe apples and the joyful cries of seasonal workers. This effervescence contrasted violently with the oppressive atmosphere that now reigned between Phoebe and Thaddeus. Since the lipstick incident, a game of cat and mouse had been established. She continued to wear the crimson shade, not daily, but enough to maintain her act of defiance. He observed her with a troubling intensity, alternating between cold anger and calculated indifference. That morning, Phoebe discovered that the lock on her door had been forced during the night. Nothing seemed to be missing, but her things had been meticulously searched. The box containing Sylvia's letters moved a few centimeters under her bed. A warning, an invasion of her space to remind her that here she possessed no true privacy. Instead of intimidating her, This discovery strengthened her determination. She contacted Audrey immediately, using the public phone in the nearby town to avoid being monitored. "I need to see you today," she murmured. "Someone searched my room. I think Thaddeus suspects something." They met 2 hours later in a small cafe in Providence, far enough from the estate to minimize the risk of being seen together. "I found something," announced Audrey without preamble, pulling a folder from her bag. "My mother's notary found these documents in his archives. It's a power of attorney signed by Sylvia, dated 1 week after her supposed disappearance." Phoebe examined the document. The signature seemed authentic compared to those on the letters. What does this mean? That Sylvia was indeed alive 1 week after leaving Thaddeus, and that she transferred a significant portion of her personal inheritance to a certain Wisteria gallery in Newport. An art gallery? Exactly. Audrey's gaze lit up. "My sister was an artist, Phoebe. Painting was her passion, her reason for living. If she invested in a gallery, then she might still be there," completed Phoebe, feeling excitement overtake her. "We have to go to Newport." "Not we." Audrey shook her head. "You can't disappear from the estate without arousing suspicion, and after what happened last night. But I want to know. I need to understand what happened to Sylvia." "Why?" Audrey's tone had hardened. "Why is it so important to you? You don't even know her." Phoebe hesitated, trying to express what she felt. "Because I see myself in her. This way she was gradually smothered, transformed. I experienced something similar with my ex-husband. Not as extreme, perhaps, but enough to recognize the signs. And now I'm starting the same pattern with Thaddeus, accepting his absurd rules, his control for a salary I desperately need." She caught her breath, surprised by her own honesty. "I need to know if she made it, Audrey. If she succeeded in freeing herself, in becoming herself again. I need that hope." Audrey considered her at length, her expression softening. "All right. I'm going to Newport tomorrow. I'll keep you informed. But promise me you'll be careful. Thaddeus is... I don't know what he'd be capable of if he felt threatened." Returning to the estate, Phoebe was greeted with unexpected news. Thaddeus had left for New York, apparently a business emergency. He would be absent for 3 days. This opportunity seemed providential. Without her employer's oppressive presence, she could explore the estate more freely, search for other clues about Sylvia. After nightfall, having ensured all employees had retired to their quarters, she headed to Thaddeus's office. The door was locked, of course, but her recent experience with the attic's old locks proved useful. The office, impeccably arranged, breathed obsessive order. In a locked drawer of his mahogany desk, she discovered a coffer containing bundles of letters. Unlike those in the attic, these had been sent, from Sylvia to Thaddeus after her departure. "Thaddeus, I know you don't understand my choice. Perhaps you never will, but I had to leave to survive. What we had wasn't love, but a gilded cage where I withered day after day. I won't come back. Don't try to find me. I've initiated divorce proceedings through Attorney Lawrence. Sylvia." The subsequent letters became increasingly formal, dealing exclusively with legal and financial matters. The last one dated from 5 years ago. Phoebe carefully replaced the documents, her mind racing. These letters seemed to confirm Thaddeus's version. Sylvia had left voluntarily, had survived, had even initiated a divorce. But then, why claim she was abroad? Why this constant dissimulation? And above all, why this obsession regarding the crimson lipstick? As she was about to leave the office, her gaze was drawn to a photograph in a silver frame, hidden behind books on a shelf. It showed Thaddeus and Sylvia on a beach, smiling in love. But what struck Phoebe was the date inscribed on the back. It had been taken a year after Sylvia's supposed disappearance. Confused, emotionally exhausted, Phoebe returned to her room, more lost than ever. When she finally fell asleep, it was to dream of labyrinths without exit, where each open door revealed new, even more tortuous corridors. Newport was barely awakening when Phoebe descended from the first train from Boston. She hadn't slept, oscillating all night between doubt and determination. Finally, dawn had found her resolute. She had to see this gallery for herself. Audrey, who had left the day before, hadn't yet contacted her. The risk was considerable. If Thaddeus learned of her unauthorized absence, she would certainly lose her job. But at this point, Phoebe wondered if that would truly constitute a loss. The Wisteria Gallery was located in the historic district, a picturesque area with narrow streets lined with colorful houses. The facade, painted a pale blue, featured a wisteria in wrought iron above the entrance, an obvious reference to the Wisteria estate. At this early hour, the gallery was still closed. Phoebe installed herself at a nearby cafe terrace, ordering an espresso while keeping an eye on the door. Her heart was racing. Was she about to meet Sylvia? To discover the truth after so many mysteries? At 9 o'clock sharp, a woman in her 60s opened the gallery. Suppressing her disappointment, Phoebe waited another hour before deciding to enter. The interior was bright, the white walls serving as a perfect showcase for the exhibited paintings. Vibrant works with brilliant colors, mainly New England landscapes, reinterpreted with an almost feverish energy. "May I help you?" asked the older woman with a welcoming smile. "These paintings are magnificent. Who is the artist?" "Sylvia Winthrop, our founder and principal artist." Phoebe's heart skipped a beat. "Does she work here?" "She divides her time between her studio in Newport and her travels. She finds her inspiration in movement, you know." "And is she present today?" The woman observed her with a new curiosity. "No, unfortunately. May I relay a message?" Phoebe hesitated. What to say? "I work for your ex-husband who claims you disappeared." "I'm simply an admirer of her work," she finally replied. "These colors are so liberating." The woman smiled more broadly. "That's exactly the word she uses, painting as an act of liberation." Phoebe lingered in the gallery, examining each painting as if she could decipher a hidden message in it. One particularly caught her attention, a woman seen from behind, contemplating a mountainous landscape, dressed in a vivid red gown that seemed to dance in the wind. "This one is special," commented the woman who had introduced herself as Mrs. Reed. "Sylvia painted it right after opening the gallery. She titled it Rebirth. It's powerful." "Yes. Did you know that before founding this gallery, Sylvia went through a very dark period? A suffocating marriage, an almost total loss of identity." Mrs. Reed lowered her voice. "She often says this gallery saved her. That art allowed her to rebuild, to rediscover herself." This spontaneous confidence surprised Phoebe. "Why are you telling me this?" Mrs. Reed studied her carefully. "Because you're wearing crimson lipstick. It's her signature, you see. Her little personal rebellion. And because your eyes have the same searching quality hers once had." A noise at the entrance interrupted them. Audrey stood in the doorway, her expression oscillating between surprise and annoyance. "Phoebe, what are you doing here?" "I had to see for myself." Mrs. Reed observed them both with interest. "You know each other?" "It's complicated," Audrey replied. "Janet, could you leave us a moment?" Once alone, Audrey turned to Phoebe, visibly agitated. "You shouldn't have come. It was imprudent." "I know, but I had to understand. Sylvia is alive, isn't she? She's well?" "Yes," Audrey sighed. "She's in Maine at the moment, for an exhibition. She returns in 3 days." "But why all this mystery? Why does Thaddeus claim she's abroad without contact?" "Because admitting the truth would be acknowledging his failure." A new voice, deep and melodious, resonated in the gallery. Phoebe turned. In the doorframe of the back door stood a woman in her 40s, with short chestnut hair and intense blue eyes. Her lips were painted with the same crimson red that had sparked this whole story. Sylvia Winthrop in the flesh, more alive and radiant than in any photograph. Time seemed suspended as the three women looked at each other in silence. Finally, Sylvia stepped forward, her gait assured, almost dancing, contrasting with the fragile image Phoebe had forged from the letters. "Audrey called me last night," she explained. "I took the first train this morning. I didn't expect to meet you so soon, Phoebe Lockhart." Hearing her name from the mouth of this woman she had been seeking for weeks gave Phoebe a strange shiver. "How do you know my name?" An enigmatic smile stretched Sylvia's crimson lips. "The estate's walls have ears, but art galleries also have their informants. I never completely cut ties with certain loyal employees. Martha, for example." "The cook," Phoebe murmured, suddenly understanding the pointed looks and half-worded warnings from the old woman. "Come," suggested Sylvia, guiding them toward a hidden door. "We'll be more comfortable discussing in my office." The space was the image of its occupant, vibrant, organized but not rigid, with bold touches of color. Sketches covered an entire wall, travel photographs another. No visible trace of Thaddeus or the Wisteria estate. "I imagine you have many questions," Sylvia began, serving them tea in artisanal ceramic cups. "Why this masquerade?" Phoebe asked directly. "Why does Thaddeus claim you're abroad, without contact, while you live just a few dozen miles away and run a thriving gallery?" Sylvia exchanged a glance with her sister before responding. "The story Thaddeus tells isn't completely false, just rewritten to preserve his pride. I did indeed leave the estate 8 years ago, after wearing this crimson lipstick to lunch with the Millers. As I did recently," Phoebe realized. "Exactly. It was my final act of rebellion, his public humiliation when he lost control in front of important guests." A shadow passed over Sylvia's face. His reaction was excessive. "That evening I understood I had to leave immediately, or risk never finding the courage to do so." "You left him just like that?" "Nothing simple about it." Her voice hardened slightly. "I fled in the middle of the night, with only a bag containing a few clothes and my sketchbooks. I slept at friends' homes for weeks, constantly changing location, terrified he would find me." "Why be so afraid?" Phoebe hesitated to ask the question, burning her lips. "Was he violent?" "Not physically, no. His violence was more insidious. He destroyed not the body but the soul with small daily touches, a comment here, a prohibition there, until you no longer knew who you were without his approval." These words resonated painfully with Phoebe, reflecting her own experience with her ex-husband. "And then? Then, fortune smiled on me. My mother passed away, leaving me a substantial inheritance. I used that money to open this gallery to start over. But why does Thaddeus maintain this fiction? You've succeeded, you have a new life. Why not simply acknowledge your separation?" Sylvia sighed, distractedly turning her cup between her fingers. Because in his world, his social circle admitting that a woman left him to flourish without him would be intolerable. He prefers the story of the ungrateful wife who went abroad, cutting ties with her family. It allows him to play the abandoned stoic husband. And you let him do this. Initially it suited me too. I wanted to disappear, rebuild my life away from his influence. Then, when I began to succeed with my paintings, we established a sort of tacit agreement. I don't contradict his version. I remain discreet in the region, and in exchange he leaves me alone." "But he keeps your portrait in the main hall," Phoebe observed. "He still wears his wedding ring." A strange expression passed over Sylvia's face. "Thaddeus never truly gives up what he considers his. I don't understand why you accept this. You're free now, you've succeeded. Why continue this masquerade?" Audrey, who had remained silent until then, intervened. "Because my sister's freedom is conditional, Phoebe. Thaddeus still has power, social, financial, legal. If he decided to take revenge—" "He wouldn't," Sylvia cut in. "Not openly, at least. It's not his style. But he could make my life very difficult. Mysteriously intimidated clients, exhibitions cancelled without explanation, suppliers who no longer deliver—" A shiver ran through Phoebe as she realized the extent of Thaddeus's influence network. "And now?" she asked. "Now that I know all this—" Sylvia fixed her with an intense gaze. "Now, you must decide. Continue working for him, knowing what you know, or break your own chains as I did." These words hung between them, heavy with meaning. Phoebe suddenly realized she had come seeking answers about Sylvia, but had found much more, a mirror of her own situation, and perhaps a path to follow. But leaving the estate meant giving up the financial security she desperately needed. It meant leaping into the unknown, without a safety net. Was she ready for that? "I need to think," she finally murmured. "Don't think too long," Sylvia gently advised. "The invisible chains are the hardest to break, and each day they sink a little deeper into the flesh." On the return journey to the estate, Phoebe contemplated the New England landscape without really seeing it. Her mind was a whirlwind of questions, doubts, and, for the first time in a long time, hope. The Wisteria estate seemed different upon her return, more oppressive, more suffocating than before. Phoebe now looked at the walls and corridors with new eyes, aware they had witnessed a story similar to the one she was beginning to live. Thaddeus was still absent, offering her a respite to organize her thoughts. The meeting with Sylvia had deeply shaken her, not only for the revelations about the past, but especially for the mirror held up to her own present. In her office, she examined the estate's accounts with renewed attention. If she decided to leave, she needed a plan. Her divorce had left debts, her business failure unpaid bills. Her financial dependence on this job was her heaviest chain. A light knock at the door interrupted her calculations. Martha entered carrying a tea tray she hadn't requested. "You look tired, my dear," the old woman commented, setting down the tray. "A little chamomile would do you good." Their gazes met, and Phoebe understood that Martha knew. She had probably been informed of her visit to Newport, of her meeting with Sylvia. "You knew from the beginning, didn't you?" she murmured. Martha imperceptibly nodded. Some secrets deserve to be discovered on one's own. Why stay here after all this time? A sad smile stretched the cook's wrinkled lips. At my age, one doesn't remake one's life, and someone must watch over, warn newcomers like you. I don't know what to do, Martha. You already know deep down. The question is, will you have the courage to accept it? With these enigmatic words, she left the room, leaving Phoebe with her tea and thoughts. The next day, the news fell like a thunderbolt. Thaddeus would return a day early. He would be at the estate by late afternoon. This announcement sparked a frenzy in the house, everyone striving to perfect their work to avoid criticism. Phoebe, strangely calm amid this agitation, made a decision she had been postponing since her visit to Newport. She went to her bank in town, where she withdrew almost all her savings. Then she visited a notary, depositing an official letter of resignation to be sent in 3 days. Finally, she contacted Audrey, asking if Sylvia's offer still stood. "What offer?" Audrey was surprised on the phone. "She didn't tell you? She offered me to work with her at the gallery." A surprised silence then. "No, she didn't tell me anything. But it's like her. She's always had this gift for recognizing artistic potential in others." "I'm not an artist," Phoebe objected. "Just a former ceramic boutique owner. For Sylvia, art is everywhere. In the way you arrange a window display, in how you arrange objects, in how you create an atmosphere. If she saw something in you." This conversation strengthened her determination. Returning to the estate, she discreetly began gathering her essential belongings. No precipitous flight in the middle of the night. She would leave with dignity after confronting Thaddeus one last time. He arrived at exactly 6 o'clock, the roar of his Range Rover resonating in the gravelled driveway. Phoebe awaited him in the hall, dressed in a midnight blue dress and proudly sporting her crimson lipstick. His expression upon seeing her was worth all the speeches. Surprise, anger, then a sort of tired resignation. "I see you've made your choice, Miss Lockhart." "Indeed. Follow me to my office." Once in the austere room where so many decisions had been made, so many lives oriented according to his will, Thaddeus suddenly seemed smaller, less imposing than usual. He pulled a file from a drawer and placed it on the desk. "You went to Newport, you met Sylvia." It wasn't a question. "Yes. And now you intend to leave me as she did." "I'm not leaving you, Mr. Winthrop. I'm resigning from a position for which I was hired." "Important distinction." He sketched a joyless smile. "She told you our story, I imagine. Her version, at least. She told me how she had to flee in the middle of the night, how she had to rebuild herself away from your influence. Did she mention that I helped her financially at the beginning, that I pressured certain galleries to exhibit her works, that I maintained this fiction of her departure abroad to protect her from gossip and incessant questions?" These revelations surprised Phoebe. No, she omitted these details. "Of course." His tone was bitter. "I'm the monster of the story, the controlling husband she had to flee. It's simpler that way." "Do you deny controlling her? Suffocating her personality, her creativity?" He didn't respond directly, turning toward the window overlooking the gardens. "I made mistakes. I confused protection and possession. When one loves passionately, the boundary is sometimes blurred. That's not love, Mr. Winthrop, it's obsession." He turned abruptly. "And what do you know about it? You who presume to judge me. Have you ever loved to the point of losing reason?" His sudden vulnerability disconcerted her. For the first time she saw the man behind the mask of control and power. "I resign," she said simply. "I'll leave tomorrow morning. I could make life difficult for you. One word from me and you won't find work in the region." "I know. But I still prefer this uncertainty to the certainty of a cage, however gilded it may be." He stared at her for a long time, as if searching for something in her features. "You resemble her, you know. Not physically, but this Determination. This inner flame. I saw it from your arrival. That's why I was so hard on you. I knew you would end up leaving too. Perhaps it's time to ask yourself why the women around you always end up feeling this imperious need to flee. This remark seemed to reach him more deeply than all the rest. He opened the file before him, took out an envelope that he held out to her. Your salary plus 3 months severance. Phoebe looked at the envelope with surprise. Why? Consider this the price of my conscience. Or a way to prove to you that I'm not completely the monster described. She accepted the envelope, understanding that in his twisted way this was his manner of apologizing, or perhaps redeeming himself. Goodbye, Mr. Winthrop. Farewell, Miss Lockhart. If you see Sylvia, tell her the portrait is still in the hall, that it will remain there. Leaving the office, Phoebe felt a strange mixture of relief and melancholy. She was leaving behind not only a job, but also a man destroyed by his own demons, incapable of changing despite the lessons of the past. That night, in her room, she didn't sleep. Dawn would find her ready to leave, to begin a new chapter of her life, a chapter in which she would choose her own colors, trace her own paths. But before that, she had one last thing to do. The sun was barely rising when Phoebe placed her letter on Thaddeus's desk. It wasn't her official resignation, that would be sent by the notary, but a personal message, words she might never have the courage to speak aloud. I forgive you, as I forgave my ex-husband, not to free you from your guilt, but to free myself from my anger. The heaviest chains are sometimes those we forge ourselves. Crossing the hall for the last time, she stopped before Sylvia's portrait. In the morning light, the painted woman's expression seemed different, no longer melancholic but serene, as if she too had found a form of peace. Martha awaited her near the door, a small package in hand. For the journey, she said, handing her what turned out to be freshly baked cookies. And to remind you there is still sweetness in this world. They embraced briefly, the old woman whispering in her ear, "Be happy, my girl. It's the most beautiful revenge." The taxi waited in the maple-lined driveway. Getting in, Phoebe cast a last glance at the estate. Majestic, imposing, but strangely diminished now that she no longer feared its influence. At the Providence station, Audrey awaited her, her face lighting up upon seeing her. "You did it," she said simply. "Yes. Sylvia is waiting for you at the gallery. She has projects to propose to you." The journey to Newport was pervaded with nervous excitement. Phoebe, accustomed for years to living in uncertainty and precariousness, was surprised to feel more anticipation than anxiety facing this new beginning. The Wisteria Gallery was closed to the public that day, but Sylvia opened for them immediately. She wore paint-stained overalls, her hair gathered in a messy bun, the very image of an artist at work. "Welcome to your new life," she greeted her with a warm smile. The space had been transformed since her previous visit. Part of the gallery had been reorganized to accommodate display cases. "I've always thought that art isn't limited to painting," Sylvia explained, guiding her. "Ceramics, when created with passion and authenticity, possess the same emotional force as a painting." Phoebe observed the empty cases, gradually understanding what Sylvia was proposing. "You want me to exhibit my creations here? I want us to create together a space where art in all its forms can flourish. Your American ceramics, my paintings, other local artisans perhaps, a place where everyone could express their creativity without fear of judgment or control." The proposal was so unexpected, so generous, that Phoebe was momentarily speechless. "But my boutique failed. I no longer have a studio or tools. I have a space in the back that would make a perfect studio. As for tools, consider them an investment on my part in our partnership." "Why? Why help me like this? You don't even know me." Sylvia exchanged a glance with her sister before responding. "When I left the estate, I was broken. Without Audrey's help, some faithful friends, I would never have been able to rebuild myself. This gallery, my art, all this exists because someone believed in me when I no longer believed in myself." She approached Phoebe, gently taking her hands in hers. "Today, I offer you what was offered to me then. Not charity, but an opportunity. A chance to discover who you truly are when you create according to your own terms, your own desires." Tears rose to Phoebe's eyes, not tears of sadness but of gratitude, of rediscovered hope. I don't know what to say. Say yes. Audrey intervened with an encouraging smile. Say yes to yourself. Thus began Phoebe Lockhart's rebirth. The following weeks were a period of adaptation and discovery. She settled in a small apartment near the gallery, set up her studio, began creating new pieces inspired by this new freedom. Working alongside Sylvia was a revelation. The woman who had traversed trials similar to hers possessed a contagious creative energy, a joy of living that illuminated the space around her. Difficult to imagine she had once been this effaced wife, controlled in her slightest gestures. How did you do it? Phoebe asked her one day as they worked late at the gallery. To rebuild yourself so completely? Sylvia, giving the finishing touches to a canvas, considered the question seriously. I understood that freedom isn't only the absence of external constraints. It's also, and above all, the ability to rid oneself of the internal constraints we've integrated. She set down her brush, turning fully toward Phoebe. For years after my departure, I continued to hear his voice in my head, judging my choices, criticizing my creations. The hardest part wasn't physically leaving the estate, but expelling him from my mind. These words resonated deeply with Phoebe, who still struggled at times against her own doubts, her own fears. And how did you manage it? By creating. Each painting was an affirmation of my own existence, my unique vision. Little by little, my inner voice became stronger than his. Sylvia approached the ceramic piece Phoebe was working on, a vase with bold shapes adorned with unexpected geometric patterns. It's happening for you too. Look at this piece. It doesn't resemble anything you did before. It's authentically yours. These encouragements, this constant validation, were a balm for Phoebe's soul. Gradually, she regained confidence in her abilities, in her intrinsic worth. The first vernissage of their combined works was a resounding success. Critics hailed the harmony between Sylvia's vibrant paintings and Phoebe's ceramics with purified lines. Orders flowed in. The gallery began to attract attention beyond New England's borders. One evening, as they celebrated the sale of a particularly important piece, Audrey brought them surprising news. Thaddeus has sold the estate. Sylvia, who was raising a toast, suspended her gesture. What? It's official since yesterday. He's leaving to settle in California, apparently. This information provoked in Phoebe a mixture of surprise and relief. Thaddeus was leaving the region, physically distancing himself, just as she was emotionally distancing herself from his influence. How do you know? Asked Sylvia, visibly troubled. Audrey hesitated. He contacted me. He wanted to return something to you. From her bag, she took out a small rosewood box that Phoebe immediately recognized, the one she had glimpsed in Thaddeus's office, containing a tube of crimson lipstick. Sylvia took the box cautiously, as if handling a dangerous object. He said it was up to you to decide what would become of the portrait, that he wouldn't take it with him. A thoughtful silence settled among the three women, each meditating on the significance of this gesture. Was it a farewell, a twisted form of redemption, or simply the late acknowledgement of a defeat? What will you do? Audrey finally asked. Sylvia opened the box, contemplating the lipstick tube that had marked the beginning of her liberation 8 years earlier. I'll keep it, she said softly, as a reminder that sometimes the smallest acts of courage can trigger the greatest transformations. She closed the box, setting it on a shelf among her brushes and paint tubes, a symbol of the past harmoniously integrated into her present. And the portrait? Inquired Phoebe. Sylvia smiled, a peaceful smile devoid of bitterness. Let it remain where it is, as a testimony that one can leave a place without erasing one's passage, that one can be elsewhere and exist fully. That night, returning to her apartment, Phoebe felt that a chapter was closing not only for Thaddeus, but also for herself. The estate, Thaddeus, this period of her life, were progressively becoming memories, important but no longer defining. Before her mirror, she applied her own crimson lipstick, no longer as an act of rebellion, but as a celebration of her reconquered freedom. The following spring brought with it an explosion of colors and opportunities. The Wisteria Gallery had expanded, annexing the neighboring space to create an area dedicated exclusively to Phoebe's ceramics and those of other local artisans she had discovered and encouraged. Her collection, titled Metamorphoses, explored themes of transformation and rebirth through pieces with organic forms and experimental glazes. The influence of her personal journey was evident in each creation. Vases that seemed to emerge from their own material, sculptures representing half-open cocoons, plates with motifs evoking hatching and blossoming. An influential critic from New York had qualified her work as an emotional revelation translated into clay, a description that had made her smile for its accuracy. That morning, standing in her studio flooded with Newport's golden light, she contemplated her latest work, an installation composed of 7 pieces representing the stages of her own liberation. From the first piece, dark and constrained, to the last, bright and open, it was the story of her personal metamorphosis, told through clay and enamel. Sylvia entered the studio, pausing a moment to admire the installation. "It's powerful," she commented simply. "You've captured the very essence of the journey." Phoebe smiled at this informal you that had naturally established itself between them over the months. From colleagues they had become friends, then confidants, united by a common experience and a mutual understanding that few could share. "I received an interesting proposal," announced Sylvia, sitting on a stool. "The Museum of Contemporary Art in Boston wishes to organize a joint exhibition of our works. They're particularly interested in how we both explore themes of identity and freedom through different mediums." Phoebe was momentarily speechless. A museum exhibition represented a consecration, a recognition of her work she would never have dared hope for so quickly. "Do you think I'm ready?" Sylvia burst out laughing, that frank and melodious laugh that had been her first victory after her flight from the estate. "You're more than ready. You always were. You just needed to believe it yourself." These simple words perfectly summarized the journey traveled. Self-confidence, that essential resource that Thaddeus, like her ex-husband before him, had strived to remove from her, she had patiently rebuilt, piece by piece, like one of her ceramics. "In that case, I accept," she replied, feeling a wave of excitement pervade her. "Excellent. We'll toast to that tonight. But first I have something else to show you." Sylvia guided her to the main part of the gallery, where a canvas covered with a cloth awaited. "I've been working on it for weeks, in secret. It's for you." Phoebe removed the cloth, revealing a portrait of herself that took her breath away. Sylvia had painted her sitting at her potter's wheel, hands immersed in clay, face illuminated by concentration and creative joy. But what struck most was the background. Behind her, like benevolent ghosts, stood other women, some with vaguely familiar features, others completely unknown, all united in an invisible chain of sisterhood and resilience. "Who are they?" Phoebe murmured, moved to tears. "All the women who have had to reinvent themselves, those I've known, those I've heard about, and those I imagine. You're part of this lineage now, that of women who have broken their chains and recovered their colors." Emotion overwhelmed Phoebe, who could not hold back her tears. This portrait represented more than a simple image. It was a validation, a celebration of her journey, but also a reminder that she had never been truly alone. "I don't know what to say. You don't need to say anything. It's my thank you for having the courage to seek the truth, to ask questions, to take risks. Without you, I might still be prisoner to this fiction Thaddeus had created." They embraced at length in this mute understanding that only those who have traversed similar trials can share. Later that day, as they prepared the gallery for an evening event, Audrey arrived with the local newspaper. "You should see this," she said, handing them the real estate page. The Wisteria estate was presented for sale, with several photographs showing the property in its best light. The listing mentioned a restructuring of assets following the owner's departure for the West Coast. "I wonder if he'll find peace there," Sylvia murmured, her expression indecipherable. Phoebe carefully observed her friend, seeking traces of regret or nostalgia. "Do you ever think about what might have been, if things had been different between you?" Sylvia gently closed the newspaper, placing it on the counter. "Sometimes. But I think mostly about what is, what I've built since then, and I wouldn't change anything in my journey, not even the darkest moments, because they led me here." She made a gesture encompassing the gallery, her works, those of Phoebe, this space of creative freedom they had built together. "The true tragedy of Thaddeus is not losing me, nor even losing you. It's never having understood that true love doesn't imprison, it liberates." These words stayed with Phoebe long afterward, as she finalized preparations for the museum exhibition. She was still thinking about them as she put the finishing touch on her installation, choosing the words that would accompany her works, because beyond technique, forms and colors, this was the message she wished to convey through her art: that freedom is a journey, not a destination. That the hardest chains to break are often those we impose on ourselves, and that sometimes the path to oneself passes through the ability to say no, simply, firmly, definitively. The evening of the vernissage, dressed in a midnight blue gown and proudly sporting her crimson lipstick, Phoebe stood alongside Sylvia, welcoming visitors who had come to discover their work. Among them were former clients of her ceramic boutique in Boston, art critics, collectors, but also Martha, who had specially made the journey from the estate. "He sold it," confirmed the old cook, hugging Phoebe, "to a California tech family who will make it a luxury hotel. A page is turning. And you, Martha, what will become of you?" A mischievous smile lit up her wrinkled face. "I'm going to settle with my daughter in Vermont. It's time for me, too, to start a new chapter." This news delighted Phoebe. Even Martha, who had seemed so resigned to her fate, had finally found the courage to leave, to choose a different life. Later that evening, as the museum gradually emptied of its visitors, Phoebe found herself alone before the installation that told her story. In the reflection of the display case, she glimpsed her image, straight, confident, smiling. A woman very different from the one who had arrived trembling at the Wisteria estate a year earlier, fearing for her future, accepting absurd rules for a salary she desperately needed. She thought of the letter she had left Thaddeus upon leaving, of those words about forgiveness as personal liberation. Today she fully understood their meaning. By forgiving, she had freed herself from the power he had exercised over her, from the shadow he had cast on her existence. And in this liberation, she had rediscovered not only her colors but also her voice, her strength, her ability to create and inspire. 2 years had passed since Phoebe had left the Wisteria estate, 2 years of discoveries, creations and healing. The Wisteria Gallery had transformed into a true cultural center, attracting artists from all over America for its innovative exhibitions and atmosphere of creative freedom. The association between Phoebe and Sylvia had evolved into a flourishing partnership, allowing them to extend their activities to teaching. Twice a week, they organized workshops for women in vulnerable situations, using art as a tool for personal reconstruction. That autumn morning, as the Newport maples adorned themselves with gold and copper, Phoebe was giving the final touch to a new collection inspired by Sylvia's letters, ceramic pieces incorporating fragments of writing, words like scars, embellished by time and resilience. The bell at the entrance door tinkled, announcing a visitor's arrival. Phoebe, absorbed in her work, didn't immediately look up. "We're closed this morning," she said automatically. "But we reopen at 2. I didn't come for the exhibition." That voice Phoebe froze, her heart skipping a beat. Slowly she raised her head. Thaddeus Winthrop stood in the doorway, different from the man she had known. Thinner, features drawn, a few grey hairs scattered at his temples, but his eyes were the same. Intense, penetrating. "Good morning, Phoebe." She straightened, mechanically wiping her clay-covered hands on her apron. "Mr. Winthrop, what a surprise." "Thaddeus, please, I think we've moved beyond formalities." An uncomfortable silence settled between them, laden with unspoken words and memories. "Sylvia isn't here," Phoebe finally specified. "She's exhibiting in Boston this week." "I know, it's you I came to see." This response surprised her. She invited him to sit in the gallery's lounge area, aware of the strangeness of the situation, receiving this man who had represented so many shadows in her life, in this bright place, symbolizing her rebirth. "What can I do for you?" Thaddeus observed the space around him, Phoebe's works displayed alongside Sylvia's, photographs of community workshops, posters announcing past and future exhibitions. "You've succeeded," he stated simply. "Both of you?" "Yes. We've succeeded. I saw your exhibition at the Museum of Contemporary Art. It was revealing." She hadn't expected this. The idea that he had contemplated her works, these pieces that indirectly told their common story, troubled her. "Why are you here, Thaddeus?" He pulled an envelope from his pocket, placing it on the low table between them. "I'm selling my house in California, starting over elsewhere. Perhaps South America," ironically. A joyless smile brushed his lips. But before leaving, I needed to close certain loops. And I'm part of these loops. You're among the people to whom I owe apologies. These words, pronounced with unexpected sincerity, completely disarmed her. The letter you left me that last morning, about forgiveness as personal liberation, it haunted me. For months I rejected the idea, and then, gradually, I began to understand. He paused, visibly searching carefully for his words. I consulted a therapist in California. He helped me see patterns I was repeating, destructive behaviors rooted in my own family history. It's not an excuse, of course, just an explanation I'm only beginning to grasp myself. Phoebe observed him, divided between distrust and a strange form of compassion. The man seated before her seemed to have lost that aura of intimidating authority that once characterized him, replaced by an almost touching vulnerability. The envelope contains the final documents concerning the estate. I've created a foundation that will transform part of the property into a shelter for women in difficulty. I hoped that you and Sylvia might be consultants for the artistic project that will be developed there. This proposal left her speechless. Why us? Because you understand. Because you've transformed your pain into beauty, your struggle into inspiration for others. He rose, visibly uncomfortable, having thus revealed himself. Think about it. Discuss it with Sylvia. My part in the project is solely financial. I won't be involved in the management. You would have carte blanche. He approached the door, then turned one last time. I learned too late that some things cannot be possessed, only honored. Some people cannot be controlled, only loved. I regret not having understood this when it still mattered. With these words he left the gallery, leaving Phoebe immobile, the untouched envelope on the table before her. Later that day, sitting on the terrace of her apartment overlooking the Newport rooftops, she phoned Sylvia to relate this surprising visit. What do you think? She asked after explaining everything. This foundation project, his request that we participate. A thoughtful silence preceded Sylvia's response. I think people can change, even those we believed incapable of evolution. I think redemption is never completely out of reach. So you would consider accepting? Not for him, Sylvia specified, but for all the women who could benefit from such a place. To transform this estate that was a prison into a space of healing and rebirth. Isn't there a certain poetry in this idea? Phoebe contemplated the sun slowly disappearing behind the horizon, coloring the sky a flaming red, as vibrant, as liberating as that which they wore on their lips. A sort of poetic justice indeed, she murmured. A few days later, Sylvia returned from her exhibition. Together they examined the documents left by Thaddeus. The project was serious, well-financed, carried by a team of social work professionals. Their role would be to create an artistic program, allowing the center's residents to express themselves, to rebuild through various art forms. We should accept, Phoebe concluded after mature reflection, not to grant him a forgiveness he perhaps hasn't earned, but to close this chapter definitively on our own terms. Sylvia nodded, a serene smile illuminating her face. And for these women who, as we once were, are in search of their own voice. 6 months later, the Wisteria Center opened its doors. The estate's main building had been entirely renovated, the once cold and intimidating spaces transformed into warm and welcoming places. The art studio occupied the former orangery, flooded with natural light, filled with diverse materials, clay, paint, fabrics, paper, tools of identity reconstruction. Phoebe and Sylvia intervened there twice a week, guiding women of all ages in their discovery of artistic expression. The rest of their time was dedicated to the Newport Gallery, which continued to prosper and evolve. Thaddeus, true to his word, never returned. Indirect news indicated he had settled in Argentina, leading a discreet life far from the circles of influence he had once dominated. One spring afternoon, as Phoebe supervised a ceramic workshop at the center, a young woman with anxiety-drawn features approached her. "I can't do it," she murmured, indicating the shapeless mass of clay before her. "I'm not good at this." Phoebe sat beside her, her hands joining the young woman's on the cold clay. "No one is good at the beginning. It's a dialogue between you and the material. Listen to what it tells you. And if it tells me nothing, then tell it something. Tell it your anger, your fear, your hope. Art isn't a question of talent but of honesty." As she gently guided the hesitant hands, Phoebe caught her reflection in the studio window, her hair slightly shorter than before, her bearing more assured, and on her lips that touch of crimson red that was no longer an act of rebellion, but a daily celebration of her reconquered freedom. In this reflection, she also saw the women behind her. Sylvia, certainly, but also all those who had frequented the centre, those who would still come, forming an uninterrupted chain of resilience and hope. The portrait painted by Sylvia 2 years earlier was coming to life before her eyes, no longer as an artistic representation, but as a tangible and powerful reality. "There," she encouraged, feeling the clay take shape under their combined fingers. "You see? It's not perfect, it's better than that. It's authentically yours." The young woman smiled timidly, her face lighting up with a new pride. Later, as the sun declined over the surrounding hills, Phoebe and Sylvia lingered in the centre's garden, savouring the sweetness of the New England evening. "You know what I like most about all this?" said Sylvia, contemplating the building that had once been her gilded prison. "What? It's that we've rewritten the story. Not just ours, but that of this place. We've transformed a space of control into a place of possibilities." Phoebe smiled, perfectly understanding what her friend meant. They hadn't erased the past. It remained there, integrated into their personal narratives, into their artistic creations. But they had given it a new meaning, a new direction. "The most beautiful of creative acts," Phoebe murmured, taking from her bag a tube of crimson lipstick, the same she had worn since that first rebellion at the estate. In a gesture that had become ritual, she applied it carefully, observing her reflection in the small pocket mirror. These red lips were no longer a symbol of defiance, but of quiet affirmation, of a life lived on her own terms. Sylvia did the same, using the tube Thaddeus had returned to her. Side by side, they contemplated the sun slowly disappearing behind the horizon, colouring the sky a flaming red, as vibrant, as liberating as that which they wore on their lips. "To freedom," Sylvia said simply, symbolically raising an invisible toast. "To freedom," Phoebe responded. "And to all these women who, like us, discover that the most beautiful journey is the one that leads to oneself." The light New England breeze caressed their faces, carrying away these words like a promise to other ears that perhaps needed to hear them. A promise that chains even the heaviest can be broken, that wounds even the deepest can become sources of strength and creativity, and that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply to choose one's own color.